Welcome to Corinne's Picks. This is another episode with an amazing artist. This week we have Dana Kawano, and this is a very important show in light of what we've been seeing in the media with the crisis affecting the Asian community across the country. She's a renowned artist. She's an illustrator. She's a ritual wear designer and a set designer. I've known her for many years, and I'm glad to have her on Corinne's Picks. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Corinne.
Today we're going to be talking about a project that is really, really important. It has to do with the trauma experienced by the Japanese American community during World War II when they were forcibly incarcerated. I would like to know, and I guess you can explain to the audience, what is the meaning of the KASA Project? What is the motivation behind it?
Well, the KASA Project started, interestingly, as part of a dance performance that was going to be put on, and they needed some props. We wanted to it was about the Japanese incarceration, and we wanted to put tattoos all over their body to tell the stories. And that proved to be logistically challenging. And so we had these umbrellas, and the choreographer said, Dana, can you do something with this? And that's how it started. And basically what launched out of that is being able to tell the Japanese American stories around the concentration camps and what happened with them. And I put them on umbrellas, and it soon turned into an exhibition in the theater lobby, and then went to the Presidio in San Francisco for the Then They Came For Me exhibition with Dorothea Lange's photos. And the main premise of it is healing. It's about healing our wounds. It's about releasing the stories about what we hold, about that experience. What I learned about the incarceration, my family was there, both sides of my family, and is that when you're held as a prisoner, you are a keen observer, and you keep your mouth shut based on survival. And many of the victims of the incarceration have been holding those stories within themselves for many, many years. And the first step toward healing is being able to release those stories. And so what I found was being able to use the kasas and art as a means to be able to represent their internal stories became kind of a powerful avenue for people to express their stories. So that's been the main premise of it. And the motivation behind it is that I saw in my community and in my family that they had that things were breaking down. Our ability to communicate, our judgment, criticism, perfectionism, everything that related to our ability to retain our family units, our community, start breaking down. And so I started to really look at that. And anyways, I decided to use this project as a way to be able to help us to release those pent up stories and to really allow us to kind of free us up toward our healing.
I really appreciate learning about this, because I think it's these stories, the stories that the average American have not heard as well. I think it's important for the next generation of Asian Americans, but it's also important for the general public, other Americans, to know these stories too, because especially now more than ever, there's so much misunderstanding about the Asian community. And I think that, it's a shame that only as an adult that I learned about the Japanese incarceration. That should have been something that was in school, in high school.
Right. Yeah, as I started to pull apart, some of the trauma around um, the incarceration of the Japanese, I realized that, the commonality of trauma is amongst all of us as human beings, and particularly those who have immigrated to America. So it's not unique to the Japanese. I mean, this particular experiences, but if you look at all of the immigration experiences, which in the United States, we are all immigrants, all of us have a story. And much of the trauma that we experience is in our bodies. We might see something that happens, and for some reason it triggers something in us that makes us angry, that makes us sad. Maybe we go through all those emotions, and everyone has an emotion about it, but they may not sit with themselves to figure out, where is that coming from? Why do I feel so angry? And so I just feel that, a way for us to be able to help each other heal is to look at it within ourselves first before striking out at each other. I mean, we all have our stories. And so that being able to educate people, being able to allow people to look at themselves in a safe place, and to be able to assess, what is happening now and why is it causing this reaction, before I go out and use that anger or use that, of what I am feeling on other people, I think is a key for us to maybe get our arms around what's going on today.
I would agree with you. I think that we've all experienced trauma in one way or another. Immigrants or people who were formerly enslaved. As you know, I come from the Caribbean, and I lived in the Virgin Islands, where we have the physical evidence of slavery. We have lots of ruins of the sugar mills still there, and I noticed that it was very difficult to get people to talk about slavery and tell that story. So it was wonderful during the pandemic. Now the country is actually really dealing with slavery in a way that it's never dealt with before. And so many stories are being uncovered. And I think with the KASA Project, I think one of the hardest thing is trying to get these stories from the elderly who were actually there.
Correct. Yeah. My parents, they were children. They were 9 and 12 years old. My father's side, he was the youngest of 7 children, and his father was killed. I showed my father the picture of the funeral that was held in the concentration camps, casket in the foreground, hundreds of people behind the family. And when he saw that picture, he didn't remember. The mind does that to you when you're trying to protect yourself from really painful experiences. And so, it's just an example of the kinds of things that we hold in our body and what we do to protect ourselves. And the parents of those children tried their best to be able to try to maybe divert their children's minds about what atrocities were happening, just out of mere survival and protection, and get them to focus on other things, playing baseball in camp, and it was just strange because when I would hear the stories from my parents, they wouldn't talk about it as concentration camp. For many, many years, I thought it was summer camp because they always talked about ice skating on the sewer. Just, trying to explain to me in a way of their point of view. And I often felt angry about that, like saying, wait a minute, learning later that it's concentration camp. It's like, why did you paint this picture for me? But I found that my anger was misdirected because understanding more deeply, it was something that they needed to do to survive. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so being able to understand that and to not judge and to be able to try to understand from a child's point of view, being held in a concentration camp at that age, really kind of opened my eyes, to forgive and to be able to hold them for what they experienced. And it was an eye opener for me. And I'm their daughter, right? But it's like I for many years just could not understand and just was really frustrated, even with my own parents, about that.
Yeah, I think that we look at history of mass lynchings of Asians Americans, deportations. It's almost to voice anger or to complain. It's a dangerous thing, especially when you're not the majority in this country. So maybe, like you said, it is a survival mechanism. I'd like to show at least one umbrella before we go to break, just so that the audience can have a better look at what we're talking about. Maybe you can describe it.
Okay. Okay, this is, I call it no, 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 no. And what it talks about is that during concentration camp, we were given 14 days to pack up everything that we own. And understand, some of us were citizens. We were born in this country. So pack up everything, go to camp, and then you're going to be there for an indefinite period of time. During the course of camp, the government imposed what we call the Renunciation Act, and it was basically questioning the loyalty of Japanese American people. Everyone from, I believe it was 17, 18 years old, had to answer this questionnaire. And there were two questions that were really relevant in terms of whether they would be willing to serve in the armed forces, and then are also asking for them to give up their loyalty to the Emperor of Japan. And how we answered those questions actually caused a division within camp. So it was almost like a divisive mechanism. So if you think about, you have 180,000 people in camp, and you create this question, and the way to weaken a group is to create division. So this, from that point on, created a division in camp, which weakened the people within the camp.
Okay, we'll get back. We're going to go to break now, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about that oath taking. We'll be back in 2 seconds.
Thank you.
Yeah. York is the canary in the coal mine. What happens to New York is going to wind up happening in your city and in your community. We are going to fight every way we can to save every life that we can. We are all first responders. Your actions can either save or endanger a life. Job one has to be save lives. That has to be the priority.
Wash your hands. Scrub them while you're singing the song. Wash. Rub your hands and fingers and the places in between. Using soap and water makes your hands so clean. Wash your hands. Great job, you're almost done. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Taking care of yourself is also taking care of others. We are all in this together.
Welcome back to Corinne's Picks. We have with us Dana Kawano, a renowned artist, set designer, and now the creator of the KASA Project. When we left, you were talking about the interned, or rather the incarcerated Japanese Americans that were forced to take oaths and how it affected them as a community in an internment camp.
Yes. So there was a division that happened in concentration camp based on how this renunciation or loyalty questionnaire was imposed on us. And even to this day, when we talk to each other, we're like, oh, are you a no-no? Or were you a yes? And so, it's like the division still exists in some ways. It's gotten much better, understanding that it was a divisive mechanism that was placed on us to weaken us. But it just shows how, the construct of this country has been used to be able to kind of manipulate things in a way that can weaken a group. It's just the way that the United States was constructed, So this hopefully will bring about some level of awareness that we might not have understood before.
How were you able to, you said that, there's a reluctance to have to go back and relive the trauma, but how were you able to get these stories from some of these families? I know, your own family stories, but how were you able to get more stories for the umbrellas?
Yes, well, some of the umbrellas are kind of more of a general statement, symbolically driven. And then also, yes, there's, when you grow up in a Japanese American community, because we lived mostly in the same neighborhoods, just out of safety. Many people, when they left camp, said, where are you going to live? And then everyone moved to the same area, just out of safety. And so, you'd hear these stories over time. And then more recently, there's some groups that are very focused on the maintenance of and sustainability of the Japanese American community. And some of those folks were willing to talk to me. Some of them, one woman was actually born in camp. So she was a victim of camp. And then some others were the children of camp victims, because that generation of people are actually, many of them have passed on. So what really has been interesting is that I interview, but really I just ask them what happened. And I have found that question is just magic. If you can just ask somebody what happened, they often will take the floor for many hours, as if no one has ever asked them before, and given them, held that space, that safe space, uninterrupted presence. and, just being open to listening. I've just found that to be really powerful, and oftentimes very healing for the person, just being able to tell their story.
And I look at the news and I'm like dizzy with anger. I mean, I just cringe. I grew up in a society where the elderly were revered. I grew up in the Virgin Islands, and to be an older person, I love the company of older people. When I hear about people attacking elderly Asian women and men, I'm wondering why, in particular, they're even targets. It seems like such a act of cowardice, extreme cowardice. And I almost feel like it's like low hanging fruit, attacking women and old people.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I'm not exactly sure why the Asian American people are now the trend in being the target. I'm not understanding the motivation around it. When you think about the history of many Asian American people, we're kind of head down people, it's like, go to school, get good grades, study, do your job, don't say anything, just work hard, don't embarrass your family. And yeah, it's been difficult. I have to say, social media is not helpful. I only needed to see, I don't even think I needed, but seeing an elderly woman hit in the face that looks like your mom or your grandmother, or your friends, is difficult. So, I can't even imagine, how the African American people felt seeing that. Maybe it's something that I learned, because maybe I didn't really fully understand what African American people go through when time after time you see, people of your origin brutalized, and it's ugly. It hurts you viscerally, like down to your core. And social media doesn't help, because it's like seeing it once is enough. But if you have to see it, if it comes up every day, several times a day, it makes you angry. It makes you angry.
Yeah, so I want to, before we run out of time, I want to get to the rest of the images, and maybe we can continue to talk about how you fabricated the umbrellas in terms of how you got the images on, whether they were hand drawn, or I know that you're like a pioneer in the photo transfer method in art. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, but also, continue to tell us a little bit more about the stories behind the images.
Okay. Okay. This is what I call just farmer in a beet field. The umbrellas, I actually had them shipped in from Thailand. I was looking for an Asian type of umbrella, and in Japan, it's really expensive to get a handmade umbrella. But in Thailand, I was able to find some. It's canvas, and I actually picked up an airbrush. I like the kind of tattoo imagery that I see with the Yakuza tattoos. And so I thought, all right, let me try it. So this is actually my first attempt at using airbrush. But I went old school on this, no digital transfer. The farmer in the beet field, basically when the Japanese were sent to camp, they were placed in barren environments like desert land. They were good farmers, and they turned that land into really productive fields. What happened, however, was that the food was supposed to be for them, and it actually became so productive that they started profiting. The guards and the U.S. started profiting because of what was being created.
Okay, can we see the next image, please?
Yeah, okay, Snake and Lady Liberty is what I'm calling it. The snake is symbolic of protection. And so I thought this was a nice way to be able to talk about the protection of our liberty.
So, when I look at that image, I think of Quetzalcoatl, the Mexican plumed, the Aztec plumed snake god, who's a god of I guess creation, but also great wisdom. And I know, I think of in Asian culture, the dragon also reminds me of Quetzalcoatl.
Yeah. Yeah, in many traditions, a lot of these have some symbolic meaning. And so I wanted to pull forward in the Japanese or Asian traditions, the symbols that these animals are.
I thought it was really heroic when some of the people who, families were victims of that incarceration by the U.S., when they saw Mexican Americans being basically incarcerated at the border in cages, I was very proud to see Asian Americans stand up and use their voices to advocate for those immigrants.
Yeah, there's an organization called Suited for Solidarity that was born as a result of seeing the separation of families at the border. It was started mainly by Satsuki Ina. She is a psychologist and has been in practice her whole life on the healing of what her family went through. And she was born in camp. So she has direct experience with this. She was separated from her father because he was a no, so to speak. He was he stood up for the rights of the Japanese people in camp, and he was separated from her. So she knows what this feels like, and that organization took action. And they have many things. They have a website that you can look it up, but they have many things that they're working on, and they keep their finger on the pulse of these ICE detention centers. The main view is that no child can reap any benefit from being separated from their parents.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I'm so honored to have you on Corinne's Picks. We'll have to do it again. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.